All right, so the things that I hit on in the first episode, this is me going to break it down in the quickest, most concise manner I can for the good information to be a good turf grass manager. So these are the biggest points in growing good grass and not growing weeds, and also not killing grass or turf and killing weeds, okay? So when somebody calls me and they got a problem with their yard, or I have questions online, they have symptoms. The symptoms are typically, the biggest ones I see is my grass is super thin and looks weak, it looks terrible. I have a bunch of weeds, or I have disease. Those are the three things I see the most. And those are symptoms of an overall problem. So why do I have weeds? Why is my grass thin? And why do I have disease? Okay? The number one thing I see in our area and with my clients and the people that call me, their biggest problem is their shade. It's typically, I said, shade versus sun, okay? Most of the time, it's too much shade. Even the shade tolerant grasses like a Zoysia palisades or a St. Augustine that's very shade tolerant, it's got to have some sun. The sun is where the turf grass gets its food. Through photosynthesis, it creates carbohydrates, takes in CO2, creates carbohydrates, spits out oxygen. It's a beautiful thing, but you got to have sun. If you don't have some sun or some filtered sun, you're not going to get the grass to grow. That's the number one thing. I showed y'all that previously. Overhanging limbs, lots of leaves, it's not getting good sun. Which direction is the turf grass you're trying to grow? Which direction is the sun facing and where is it hitting it at? So if I have a front yard that is facing the north, more than likely, where I'm at, it's going to be thin because the sun dropping down in the fall, winter, and spring, and it's not getting good sunlight, and it thins out every fall, winter, and spring. Whereas if I have faced on the south, if my front yard, my front door is facing the south, it's usually good thick turf because it's getting plenty of sun. And so that's the number one thing I see. What do I tell people to do? Limb up their trees, all the overhanging, arching limbs. Limb them up. Phone's going low battery. Limb up the trees. Cut any trees that you can, that you want. You can either have dense shade or you can have grass. You can either have trees in some instances or you can have grass. You typically can't have both. So that's just decisions you got to make. Shade versus sun. And then if you are filtered shade or filtered sun, you need to go with St. Augustine or some kind of Zoysia. You don't need to pick Bermuda or Centipede. It's going to thin out. Okay? That's the number one thing I see. So look for that in your yard before you look for anything else. Same thing, poor soil quality. That can be anything from it's not draining well, it's holding water. It can be anything from compaction. Those are probably the two things I see the most. It's either a very small backyard with dogs running over an area or kids playing in the backyard over and over. You can relieve that compaction through aerification. Either that or your pH is too low. If it's centipede, it can be too high. So you can do lime and you can aerify. Those two things will help in most situations. If you have a drainage problem, you probably need to put in a French drain or figure out where the water's stopping and get it to a low point. You do not have a drainage problem if after a flash flood 24 hours later you don't have standing water. If you have standing water 24 hours after a flash flood, then you have a drainage problem. So poor soil quality, pH is too low most of the time for Bermuda and Zoysia, so get it up with some lime. I would say equal to that is the actual height cut of the grass, what I showed y'all in the previous video, especially in my non-irrigated yards. that and frequency. But in my non-irrigated yards, people are mowing too low and not mowing frequent enough. And so when you mow low, your roots are low. The lower you mow, the more maintenance it causes. And so you've got to raise your mowing height so your roots will be longer so it can handle the stress without getting the water, and it can handle the winters of the low digit temperatures with ice that we've been having in our area. Okay? And that kind of goes back to the shade versus sun, just making sure you have the right grass for your situation. And so know where you're at and know your situation. Know your zone. We're in zone 7. I'm in the transition zone right there. If you call and ask me and you're across the country, or I see a question, all they do is post a picture and say, my Bermuda grass is not doing well. I'm like, where are you at? And if they're in the transition zone, and depending on the time of the year, is gonna help me know how to advise them further. And so St. Augustine, centipede, all that grows. Bermuda grows really well right here. The St. Augustine, as you go further north, it's not doing well like I told you in the transition. Like I was saying, St. Augustine is taking a beating in the transition zone in my area due to the extremely cold temperatures. It does better down south. Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, centipede and all that probably does pretty good in the transition zone, probably less likely on the centipede. So know, right grass for the right situation. Height of cut, mow frequently at the proper height for your grass. You can scalp it down early spring, but as it gets warmer, bring up the height of cut. Bring up your actual height of cut as it gets warmer for non-irrigated yards especially, so that your roots get longer, so you can have a healthier turf, so it can withstand the drought, it can withstand the cold temperatures. Okay? The more frequently you mow, the healthier, the thicker the turf. I recommend Bermuda grass and zoysia 2 times a week during the primary growing season, especially if you got water and it's growing fast. It'll thicken up and it'll knock those weeds out. All right, last but not least, water. Obviously, not everybody can water their lawn during the drought season. In our area, you really only have 4.5 months. You got June, July, August, part of September to really thicken up and grow your grass. Most of the time we have some kind of drought in July or August, and you're losing ground if you're not watering. If you do have irrigation, water deep and infrequent. So during the primary growing season, I tell people water twice a week, water very deep, let it sit for 3 or 4 days, and then water again. More times than not, people are watering too much, watering every day of the week, watering 3 or 4 days a week, and that makes their roots look really short because all the water is standing on top of the ground and the roots are growing up. And so you want to water deep so the water goes down low in the soil, and so the roots follow it down low in the soil. So water deep, water infrequent. That's another big one that I see. Even clients that have irrigation, I'm like, well, what's your watering schedule? And their water schedule's messed up. You need to water early in the morning before the sun comes up. Knock the dew off the grass, which I call eutation water, that helps cause diseases. And also, if you water early in the morning, gives it time to get down in the soil and really be taken up by the plant when the day comes. Water in the middle of the day, a lot of it gets evaporated into the atmosphere. And so you get all this right, you get your shade versus your sun tolerance right, you limb up trees, get as much sun as possible, have good soil, aerified soil with a good pH, lime if you need to, have your height of cut right for your type of grass. Centipede and St. Augustine, I definitely recommend mixed grass. I definitely recommend 3 inches, 3 1/4. Mow frequently as you can, minimum once a week. That'll help thicken up your grass. You get into the Bermudas and the zoysias, some of them you really can mow lower. Hybrid Bermudas, man, you can mow them super low. But if you're going to do that, you need to fertilize more, you're going to need to water more, and you're going to need to keep an eye on it. And a lot of customers don't water properly if they have the chance. If you can't water, certainly, I don't care if it's Bermuda, Zoysia, what it is, if you don't have irrigation, mow it high, 3 inches or greater, 3 1/4, okay? And so just for the weed control, these are some of the staples that I use. It certainly isn't all I use, but these, 4 chemicals are probably used most frequently by me, especially in the spring. And so the first one is prodiamine. Don't worry about the trade name. Just worry about the active ingredient. There's plenty of prodiamine products out there, liquid and dry formula. This is a dry formula one. I do 1 pound to 1.5 pounds per acre, spring and or fall. And so what I like to do is in the spring is combine these chemicals. Bermuda, Zoysia, really good. I would hesitate in St. Augustine and Centipede just because over time it can start hurting your roots because it is a big time inhibitor, and over time it could really hurt your roots. Unless you're down south where you got sandy soils, may not be as big a problem. You got thick soils, I'd be careful with this. Even though it's labeled and at lower rates, it's probably fine. But what I do is I go to Simazine, and that is Princeps, the trade name. Simazine is the active ingredient. That's what you want to look at. And so this is kind of a pre-post, and I like it on the Centipede and St. Augustine mixed grass yards, carpet grass yards. You can do that and combine it with these other 2 chemicals I'm about to show you at 16 to 32 ounces spring and fall. And it does a pretty good job, and it's safe. It's actually safe on sprigs. So it apparently is pretty darn safe on roots. And so I like this in my mixed grass, Centipede, St. Augustine. I also will put it in with prodiamine, depending on the situation in the spring. I may do 16 ounces or 20 ounces with the prodiamine on that first app in January/February, because it helps clean up some annual grasses that you can get. And then I tank mix the Simazine or the prodiamine with, I like Change Up. It's a 4-way product, doesn't have 2,4-D. It has phytonil, so it's really safe without the 2,4-D on the Centipede and St. Augustine. That's why I like it. I'm not sure if there's others with the same exact active ingredients as Change Up, but it's a good product. I really like it. Good in the summertime on buttonweed. It's a safe product, like I said. If you can't find that or get that, you can find Trimec, you can find Enrun, Triplet. There's a ton of different names for it. I do 16 to 20 ounces of that, tank mix it with prodiamine or Simazine. At these kind of rates, it's pretty darn safe on all your warm season grasses. This is 8 ounce to 16 ounces per acre Change Up. And so I will also tank mix with MSM Turf, metsulfuron. Lots of trade names for it. And so I do 0.35 to 1/2 ounce spring and fall. And so on one of my first applications, if I'm really trying to clean a yard up, I may do 1 pound of prodiamine with 8 ounces of Change Up with 1/2 ounce of MSM Turf plus surfactant. That's a good concoction. One application of that is going to get you pretty clean. Bermuda, Zoysia, St. Augustine. I'd be careful on the Centipede, going heavy with the MSM Turf. I'd back that down to 0.35 ounces, even though it's labeled. So that's just some staples of what I do on the weed control chemical side. As the year rocks on, different times of year, even in the spring, I use a plethora of other things. And so I'll continue to show what I use and how I do it and the rates I go out. We're going to have further videos, calibration. I'm going to show you super simple ways to calibrate your backpack sprayer for you home lawn guys. I started my business with a backpack sprayer, a solo backpack sprayer that had a dual nozzle stuck on the end, and I started out like that for the first year or two. Not too bad in a small yard, 5,000 square feet. You get on into the half acre, 3/4 of an acre, it's a lot of filling up. But I'm going to show you how to calibrate sprayers, backpack sprayers, pump up sprayers, zero turn sprayers, John Deere Gator golf course sprayers, any kind of sprayer you can think of. I'm going to show you super simple ways to calibrate those things where it's just not overly complicated. I'm also going to get into the individual grasses of what we do and what we recommend and how we treat the individual grasses a little bit different, because I do treat them different. And it's depending on their microenvironment situation, I may treat them totally different than some of our other yards. And so we really try to customize what we're doing in our clients' yards. And so there they are, the 4 things out there to the right there. I got pre. Establish that pre-emerge, prodiamine and or simazine, spring and fall. Do all these other things. So man, if you have thin grass, lots of weeds and disease, I would check your shade to sun tolerance of the type of grass you have. Bermuda grass loves the sun. St. Augustine has some shade tolerance. Zoysias have some shade tolerance. Centipede wants the sun, lots of sun. And so when I say lots, you need a minimum, I would say 7, 8, 9 hours, for your Bermuda, 9, 10 hours. The shade tolerant grasses, you can maybe get away with some filtered sun or maybe like 6 hours, something like that. But check, do a soil test. Lots of extension agents out there, lots of ways to take soil tests, see where your pH is at, see if your soil is compact, and relieve that compaction. Proper height of cut, actual height of cut, frequency, mow frequently, water once, twice a week, deep and infrequent, and if you don't have irrigation, mow high.